Give them a big NCS Franklin welcome.
Hey. Are we sitting?
You can sit or stand. What do you want to do? Sit down?
Yeah, let's sit.
Okay, let's sit down. Speaking about pulling the veil down while we're at it, Larry wants us to say that you can sign up for our email list, which you get, 2 a month? That's it? Every now and then we give you some propaganda, but it's pretty rare. And we don't ask you to tithe to us either. Just saying. So talk about pulling the veil down. I have this theory that says if you know yourself, you know every other guy in the room. So I know myself. So would you like me to confess your sins to you this morning so that you don't have to? Is this pulling the veil down? Perfect. Okay, great. This morning, every now and then we usually have a speaker, and every now and then we have the opportunity to have a conversation. So this is one of those mornings. Lance has been in this city how many years?
10 years.
10 years.
Yep,
and
10
why
years.
did you come to Nashville?
We moved down here when, and we're not from New York. We lived in New York for 6 years. I'm originally from Oklahoma. My wife and I.
Is anybody else here from Oklahoma? You're a rare breed.
Wow.
Okay.
I lived in Virginia. I moved 26 times, so I guarantee you I've lived overlap somewhere. There you go. Okay. I grew up in Virginia. That's kind of close enough. No. We moved down here with a nonprofit called Q Ideas right after we had our first child.
Yeah, and how many babies you got?
We've got three. We've got three. So
how
we've
old
got
are they?
Rosie's 9, Charlie is 7, and Henry is 5. So we're in the middle of it right now.
I love the name Henry.
Henry.
Have you taught him I'm Henry VIII? Have you taught him that song?
No, I haven't.
I can sing it for you in German if you want to, but then mind that.
Perfect. Yeah. Let me call him.
Ich bin Heinrich VIII. Ich bin.
Yeah.
Yeah, for any of you German guys out here. Okay, so you got 3 kids.
We do, yeah.
How did you meet your wife? What happened there?
Yeah, so in New York, I started an organization with a friend called Restore NYC. We had heard about this thing called sex trafficking, and we opened a safe house in New York for traffic victims. And so we were at an event, and she was volunteering at a sister nonprofit called Reveal. And so at that event, she went up and spoke, and then I went and followed her as she came down the stairs, and we talked that night and got engaged about 6 months later.
And married 3 days after that, probably.
Yeah,
almost,
that
right?
weekend.
Yeah, that weekend. Yeah, that's interesting. So while we're on this sex trafficking thing, this was one of the early things in your family life that stirred your hearts. Tell us a little bit about what was the motivation, what you see now going on. Do you see this in Tennessee? We're going to get into some other things, but I want to go back to family things for a minute.
Yeah. So do we see that? Yeah, I mean, trafficking here is a real thing. Absolutely. How we in Tennessee, kind of work on trafficking. The TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, they handle kind of the intake of all the trafficking, and then there are the 3 grand divisions here in Tennessee. There are nonprofits in each of these grand divisions that do the aftercare. And so here in Middle Tennessee, Cora, which was in Slavery, Tennessee, now does all the aftercare. But the victims that we saw in New York were mostly international and were trafficked in. There's a lot of domestic trafficking happening here in Tennessee.
So a lot of what you saw in New York was a little different because it was, the caricature in the mind about trafficking often is this is what you just described. The international, you have this picture in your head.
That's right.
And the domestic trafficking is very different.
Yeah, it's a little more nuanced. And when you've been trafficked internationally, a lot of times it comes under the guise of I'm going to move to New York so that I can work, and then I'm going to work off a debt so that I can send it back to my family.
Yeah, right.
And you're in this perpetual cycle of paying off your debt, and you're not making money fast enough. Oh, you can enter into prostitution.
Yeah, it's like indentured slavery.
Exactly, and a lot of times these women don't actually see themselves as trafficking victims. They see themselves as, well, I'm just prostituting to pay off my debt, not knowing that, no, this was the plan all along.
Right. Exactly.
And then here, a lot of times trafficking takes on the face of a boyfriend, somebody that is known. A lot of our kids that are aging out of the foster care system, we have very vulnerable populations that are more susceptible to trafficking just because they don't have community.
Yeah, and this was Centonia Brown Long's story.
That's
where
right.
She thought her trafficker was her boyfriend.
That's right.
And
Very
she
common.
never. I mean, even after she was in prison, she went to prison when she was 16. It wasn't until about the age of 29 that she accepted the fact that she was a victim.
Yep.
There was such a brainwashing, such a cult kind of experience, a one over one domination
Yeah.
from her trafficker that she couldn't understand
It's very common.
that she was a victim.
Well, because it's odd to try to convince someone that you're a victim,
Right.
when they're saying, "No, I'm not. This was a relationship that I'm in," and you're, "Hey, sorry to break the news to you. This was the plan all along."
Exactly.
And that's hard to hear and accept. And yeah.
Well, let's jump back a little bit. So you came to work with Q.
Yep.
The Q conferences. You worked with them for
Four years,
5 years,
before
right?
they kicked me out. Yeah.
Yeah, they kicked you out.
Yeah. Not really, but
You want to talk about that? Or you?
no. Well, that's
We
I
have,
am
we
second.
have some trauma therapists
Yeah.
in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, so that happened, and then soon after that, you were with I Am Second, right?
Yep.
Which is we somehow met either during the Q conferences or the I Am Second. I don't. My memory's faded about that.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about your experience with I Am Second, and I want to get back after we talk about that to the things that were a part of your spiritual formation, because all of these things inform both who you are now and how you got here. To me, is one of the most interesting things about anybody's story. It's like, what's the formation in our life? But talk about I Am Second, maybe one of those experiences that really helped you see the world in a different way.
Who's familiar with I Am Second? Anyone? A few? Okay, great. Yeah, so, I Am Second, a little history. A guy named Norm Miller, the CEO at the time of Interstate Battery, basically had a dream. And the way that Interstate Battery spread was he used billboards to be kind of his marketing piece. This was 2005, 2006.
Right.
Had this dream. He was a part of E3, which is an international missions organization, and had this realization that we need to take care of our own Jerusalem. And for him, that was North Dallas. And, I Am Second kind of took off like a rocket. This is when YouTube kind of emerged. And so you have YouTube, which is this great marketing distribution, and you've got this great storytelling. And so for me, I had been at Q for 4 years and had this incredible opportunity to be the president of I Am Second, and took it. And it's interesting, the way that the reason why I Am Second was successful was because you were looking at somebody that you knew or knew of,
Right.
and they were explaining their story of brokenness.
Right.
And
It was kind of a reintroduction to the Christian community, that you could talk about sorrow.
That's right.
In public.
yeah, and brokenness. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that all of us have in common. Not all of us have shared success, but we certainly all have shared brokenness.
Right.
And so this person that maybe you esteemed was saying, "Hey, let me let you behind the veil." And the reality of my story is that I am broken, and here's how the Lord walked with me through my brokenness. And I think as we talk about kind of my faith, that is the thing that qualifies us to Jesus, is our brokenness.
Right.
And because it was kind of an influencer marketing strategy, people gravitated towards it. Now my issue with I Am Second, and what eventually I spent a lot of time doing was, okay, well, now what? I've heard this story, now what? And as many of you all know that are here, the value of community. I mean, you can be inspired, and inspiration's great, and that moment of realizing, okay, it's okay for me to be broken, but how do we get people into community faster?
Right.
Is that kind of became the goal.
So this part of your personal journey was both formative, but it was also, by this time, you had this as a core value of your life, to say, we need to acknowledge the brokenness, we need to be honest about who we are, we need to live our life in community, in a life-giving community. Give us a little bit of a snippet about your journey getting to that point, because usually there's a journey involved, there's some kind of a story involved, there's some sort of a process until we learn it's okay to be that open?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it is about safe spaces, right? If you can't be honest, number one, with yourself, or honest with those that are around you, I think that's where the enemy really breeds lies.
Right.
And we start believing those lies to be true about ourselves. And for me, even starting in college, I mean, I had a mentor that I spent every single week with. And he uses this term now called adventure discipleship. And we would go spearfishing, and we'd go, hog hunting, and do all these things outdoors. And he was able to integrate kind of the outdoors into just spending time with a bunch of young college guys. And we thought we were just having fun. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. We thought we were just having fun and going on adventures. The reality is it was the conversations that we were having to and from wherever we were going, or if we were up late one night. And so being mentored was the key. And then when I was in my mid-20s, there's another guy that kind of reached out to me, took me under his wing. I call him an old-timer. He's since passed.
Old as the guys in the room?
Yeah.
Kind of like
you
us?
guys, yeah.
We're old-timers, okay.
That's right,
Yeah.
Which is a badge of honor. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think enough guys with some gray hair realize how significant their age and experience is. And if they stepped into that and owned that and were okay with that, there's immense value in being fathers and grandfathers to the Christian faith. And so this guy was very comfortable. And, similarly, he invited me to go fly fishing out in Montana. And, we, for the last 12 years.
We were supposed to be on one of those trips together. And
you were, yeah. You turned down my invitation.
I turned down your invitation.
Yeah.
I had to bring that up. Okay.
But that's, it was always doing something together. It wasn't as much this as it was shoulder to shoulder.
And I think that's one of the things that's really important because one of the things that Lance and I talk about are what are action points for our community of life? What can we do? Are we just sitting around retiring? Or is there something we can do? And there's so many young guys that would value time with us.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to believe they would like time with me. And we think, well, how am I going to do this thing when it ought to be shoulder to shoulder? Maybe having an adventure, maybe going somewhere, maybe getting involved with JT. With one of his projects or something else going on. There's so many opportunities
That's right.
like that. So let's talk about where you are now. You're at the governor's office on the faith initiatives and community outreach. How did that happen, and what are the objectives of this venture, which is a new thing for the state of Tennessee?
So the office is called the Governor's Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. I've been there for 13, 14 months, and being that we're in Williamson County, I would guess a lot of you all probably know the governor personally.
He spoke right here, sat right there.
Yeah, wow, that's a huge honor to share the stage.
Yeah.
It was totally the Lord. So after I Am Second, I was a part of a nonprofit that we started during COVID, and the hardest 3-4 years of my life, and just felt like the Lord was like, I don't want you to leave yet. I want you to keep holding on to this, which made no sense for our family. And I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon from our pastor, and he basically said, hey, we were having lunch with the governor, and he was talking about this position, and we basically said, we know your guy. And within about a week, I had gone to the Capitol, met with the governor, which I had never done. I knew nothing about politics. And
do you know anything now about politics?
Well, unfortunately. We weren't supposed to talk about that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So started last September.
Yeah. And so what does the office want to do? What is your vision for, I mean, part of the directorship, I would assume, is that while Governor Lee has thoughts about what he would like to see happen, there's a lot of room for creativity for you to develop. What is the initiative? What are the objectives going to be? Talk to us about that, and about some of the things that what do you see in Tennessee that you didn't see before you were doing this?
Yeah, I think it's important to know, he's kind of become, at least in our circles, famous for saying government is not the answer. And that the only way we're going to solve our, complex problems in society is through the people that live in these communities. Yeah. And so when I took the job and started understanding, what is the opportunity here and what are the things that you want to focus on at the time, he had 4.5 years left. Now we've got a little over 3. There were a few buckets that he really saw that the faith community. So we work with the faith community. We work with a lot of nonprofits. We also work with companies that are trying to engage in doing good for the local community. And so it's really this: how do we take what typically comes through the front door of state government and solve it with public-private partnerships? How do we allow the church to do what the church does? How do we get out of the way of the church? Right. And so the things that right now that I spend most of my time on are all things child welfare, and understanding the child welfare space is really, really important because that's about as far upstream as you're going to go.
Right.
And then we also focus a lot on the incarceration reentry space. We focus a lot on poverty in general. Housing is kind of at the epicenter of any time you're working with a vulnerable population. Housing is always going to be right there. So, housing, transportation, food insecurity. And we're not just talking about downtown, Memphis or downtown Knoxville, or we're talking about rural Tennessee. I mean, as you all know, most of Tennessee is rural. There's 95 counties. There's about 4 or 5 counties. And while it's disproportionate that people live in those counties, there's a lot of Tennesseans that live kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
So when you listen to Governor Lee publicly or even in private, he will tell you that the reason he ran for governor was he wanted to do education reform and he wanted to do prison reform.
That's right.
Do you want to tap into that a little bit?
Sure.
What's going on?
Sure, yeah. So, 25 years ago, the governor was running, Lee Company and was volunteering with an organization called Men of Valor. Show of hands, who's heard of Men of Valor? Yeah. Their marketing's a little better than I'm second, apparently. And, I think he thought, hey, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help this young man as he comes out of custody. And the reality is, he'd tell you is that young man actually helped him.
Right.
And so that's often the case, right? When you start, we kind of come in with this savior mentality of we're going to save the day, and I got a few things to teach you, and da-da-da. And then you realize, this is actually far more complicated and nuanced. Right. And so that was a big motivation for him, is going and understanding. I mean, it is nearly impossible when you are released from prison to stay out of prison, depending on the community that you have, the resources that you have available. And so, that was a big part of it.
I'll never forget one of the days we were at the Tennessee Women's Prison and visiting Centoya Brown, and she was going to get out. We knew the date that she was going to get out. And we were standing at the guard gate waiting to get in and waiting for whatever process had to happen. And one of the ladies who had been at the Tennessee Women's Prison, probably around the age of 60, maybe in her 50s, her grandmother was still alive, living over by Donaldson or something. She was waiting for a ride. She had everything that she had in a black garbage bag. Mm-hmm. No way to get where she was going, didn't have a job, had a place to sleep, and that was it.
Right.
And so I think this is more common than we know, it being in our little bubble life that we live, which I'm thankful for, right. But I don't want to stay in the bubble and be unaware. One of the thoughts that occurred to me, how many people in the room are involved in a nonprofit of some kind or another? Raise your hand or stand up so we can see you. All right. So the resources in this room are phenomenal.
Right.
The people in here, the creative thought that's going on, the work that has been done. And I don't know I don't know how you connect with Lance in the office, but if there's some connection, we want to encourage you to be in touch with Lance and let him know what you're up to. Maybe you already have a good sense of it, but if in one room there's that many people involved in some kind of a nonprofit outreach for the betterment of the community, that to me is extraordinarily encouraging. And for the guys who aren't involved, somebody stood up close to where you are and asked, how can I help, as an action point, right?
That's right. Yeah, well, I brought my trusty Bible here with me. I get the question a lot, how do I help, right? And you guys have all heard the saying, never trust a man that doesn't walk with a limp. So in the same way that we started, we've all gone through stuff. I mean, if we're not in a storm, we're in between storms, right? That's just kind of how life works. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality. And the reality is that we're not alone in the storm. Right. And a lot of people are alone in the storm, but we are not. There's two verses that I want to share with you today. One that comes out of 2 Corinthians 1:4. It says, or 3 and 4. Blessed be the God of our Father, Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercy, God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our afflictions. This is the part we miss. So that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort which we received from God. And so it's an economy. I mean, it's truly an economy. We walk through stuff. The Lord is there. He's faithful. That is something that we have to share with other people. It's actually not to be kept to ourselves, right? And it's a beautiful picture of how we add value. I mean, you might be sitting in here thinking, well, what do I have to offer to someone coming out of prison, or what do I have to offer to a child that's in custody? We've all walked through storms. We've all walked through things that are hard and difficult, and we've all been comforted by the Father. That is the same comfort that we get to use. And then the other. Sorry, I'm preaching at you this morning.
You're not a bad preacher. That's pretty good.
Okay. All right. So this is out of Romans 15. And let me just remind you, we're sitting in the wealthiest county in the state, in the fastest growing economy in the country. I mean, we could go on and on about why God has blessed Tennessee in a way that we've never seen before in history. People are moving here in droves. God's favor is here, and it's beautiful to watch. So it says, we who are strong, which is this group right here, we have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Another version says, strength is for service, not for status. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. For Christ did not please himself, but it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached fell on me. And what that means is the hardship of our neighbors. Those are our hardships. We take responsibility for the hardships of our neighbor. And I think a lot of what we struggle to do sometimes is figure out, well, who is my neighbor? Who is God calling me to be my neighbor? And so I would leave you kind of with those verses this morning.
When we had Jeff Long, who was the sheriff here in Franklin, come speak, I asked him the question, what's it like being the sheriff in the wealthiest county in Tennessee? And he said, it's not what you think. He said, there's a line of demarcation. He said, there are homes in Williamson County that have dirt floors and no indoor plumbing. And again, this is speaking to our bubble and speaking to our awareness. Part of what we want to do with these microphones and with our group is to live in an increasing level of awareness about the community that we live in, and an increasing level of awareness about what our role is in this. Not just to be so pleased that we're the wealthiest county, but what do we do with this
That's right.
incredible gift that God has given? We have a few minutes, and I wonder, with the brilliant minds that we have in this room, what questions you might have for Lance. Anybody have a question you'd like to throw out for conversation back here?
Great question.
Say it again.
What happens to the governor's initiative after he leaves office? So one thing is helpful to know is that the governor was not the first person to set this office up. This office was actually started under Bush,
George
W. Bush,
Yeah.
and there has been a faith-based office federally since, Obama. I mean, there's a faith-based office now. And so while that's a good question, is will it have, we have a long leash, as I like to say, and we get to work, kind of at the request of the governor. The question is, what will the next governor do with the faith-based office? We're working hard to really make sure that this office is established. My position is appointed. I cannot speak to who the next governor will be, but that really time will tell. If we get another man of God that sees value in allowing the church and allowing people of faith to intersect with what's happening in state government, we're just getting started. I mean, truly, we're just getting started. If they don't see that value, it will be hard for this office to be relevant. It will be more like window dressing. When you say support, are you saying funding? Yeah. Great question. So up until a year ago, we were privately funded. This past legislation, we had to change a policy essentially that allowed our office to receive public dollars, and so all 1.2 of that reoccurring dollars come from the state. It's a good question though.
Anybody else? Brian?
You were talking about trafficking earlier. I know we talk about living in this bubble and what's going on around us. I know enough to know that that's a big deal here in Tennessee. Do you have any stats on the magnitude of that you can share with the group, just to enlighten folks on how big of a deal that is? And then follow-up question, what do you need right now? You got a room full of people that, what are you working on? What do you need? Who do you need to meet?
Yeah.
Can we help you?
Yeah, great question. To be honest, there's not great data on trafficking. We just did this project called Engage Together. It's essentially a collective impact model. It pulls law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement, all the nonprofits that work on this, and they estimate that they know 10% of the data on trafficking total. So we have a long way to go. I just found out, what is today? Thursday. I found out Monday that Tennessee lost its federal funding for our trafficking unit, and so we're trying to figure out are there private foundations that could pay for that? We're talking about TBI officers. We're talking about the funding that goes to streamline these processes, and so there's a lot of work to be done there that we're still figuring it out. And then what are the needs? I mean, gosh, that's a really great question. And while it would be great to say, hey, go do A, B, and C, to me, it's actually far more complex. There's a guy sitting at the bar named Steve. Steve, can you wave your hand? So I'm going to do a bad job telling his story, but I need you guys to do what Steve did, and that is Steve spent 40 years in commercial kind of building hospitals, and 2 years ago He said, I've got 40 years of experience and relationships, and I'm going to take those 40 years of experience and relationships, and I'm going to see how I can help the kingdom. And so he started something called Share Built, which means a nonprofit can go to him that is, refuge center here in town. Hey, we're doing a big building campaign, and we don't know how to do that. Will you work with us? So they pull together all the potential contractors to come bid on the project. They walk through the architecture. They walk through the build out. They help them with project management and the whole building process. Well, if Steve was here 5 years ago and I said, hey, Steve, go and get involved with human trafficking. Well, no, Steve, take what you've been doing for the last 4 decades and apply it to helping nonprofits and kingdom projects that are happening in your area. And so what I would say when you ask what can we do, I would say you all have incredible gifts. You all have incredible experience. You all have relationships. Lean into that. Really lean into how can I take my experience, my relationships, and leverage those for kingdom building. And I think that's the call to all of us. There's no exception to that call. In terms of our office in particular, we are focusing. This year, we're rebranding engagement with child welfare. In Q1 of next year, you'll see a campaign called Every Child Tennessee. We want to change. Right now, kids are waiting for placement. We want to change that adults are waiting for a placement. We want to change the fact that when a kid comes into custody, there's so many families that are ready to foster and adopt that it's the families that are waiting and not the kids. So that's, that may be you, that may not be you. But that's a big effort for us. And like I said, that's as far upstream as you're going to get on things like incarceration. Kids that age out of the foster care system. Listen to these stats. Kids that age out of the foster care system, between those that are homeless and incarcerated, it's 80%. 80% are either incarcerated or they're homeless by the time they're 21 years old. Last year, we had 801 children that aged out of the foster care system. So, if incarceration's your thing, or reentry, if trafficking, a ton of these kids are going to be trafficked. They have no family. They have no community. They're 18 years old. And so how do we engage and invest when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 years old so that in 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they're not the ones that are incarcerated or committing offenses?
We're out of time, but what I'm hearing you say is that unless there is a public-private cooperation, your office isn't impotent, but can't be nearly as effective as what happens when the churches, the nonprofits,
Absolutely.
the private sector unites with the mission.
That's right.
And there's so much to do. Do you have a closing statement, and then we're done?
No, just thank you for your time this morning. If something that I said, you felt compelled, I've got lots of cards. I'd love to give you one, and we can go grab coffee and talk more about, anything that you're feeling God stirring up.
Thank you so much for being here. And if you want to go fishing, let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.